We heard a lot today about consumers, about business models, digitization, and Thomas Grosser from Google mentioned the whole AI thing. So basically the next panel will be exactly about AI, artificial intelligence and beyond, how AI and machine learning will change business in the future. And the co-founder of Meetup, of the Meetup at FinTechFFM, Felix Scheffka, will be your host.
Hello, everybody. So, please, I'd like to welcome on stage, in the direction you guys take a seat, however you'd like to. To my left, it's Fehse, followed by Roberto Mancone and Jochen Papenbrock, and they have Charlie Delingpole. Was that correct? Last name? Yes. Good. And before we start digging into the topic, guys, can you maybe introduce yourself with a few quick remarks on your background and maybe also what connects you to the topic?
Well,
please.
I can start. I'm Michael Fehse. I'm the designated CDO of a startup in Frankfurt which is called savedroid. savedroid's task is to help young consumers do savings to fulfill wishes. All this happens via an app in a cloud. Surprisingly, a lot of young people downloaded it and use it. Even so, they give up their financial information. And I'm the guy who does all the data analytics on this, and the AI on it and predictions. And my goal is to predict the customer's behavior before it emerges, so we can tailor the product.
Okay, I'm Roberto Mancone from Deutsche. I'm the global head of Disruptive Technologies and Solutions, so in charge of AI, blockchain, and IoT. Background in 25 years of corporate banking, corporate finance, and different banks and different continents, from sales, distribution, process, products, marketing, you name it. And then after quite a long time, I realized that probably it was time not to play anymore with the organizational charts and adjusting business models, but also try to decide, embrace the technologies that we believe can help us to change the way we normally operate in the financial industry. And therefore, we are applying these technologies, as we will have time to discuss later on.
Good afternoon. My name is Jochen Papenbrock. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a startup here from Frankfurt, founded 2012. And our focus is artificial intelligence, machine learning, and network analysis for financial applications, focusing on the connections of data. So the links in data is very important, and creating solutions for risk management, portfolio construction, and many more.
Hi, my name's Charlie Delingpole. I started a company called ComplyAdvantage, and we're basically applying machine learning to try and tackle the problem of terrorism. So not all superheroes wear capes. Some of them use like big data to try and track every single terrorist in the world, every single money launderer, build a huge database that's going to live real time, and then try and stop those terrorists or money launderers transacting with other banks or payment companies.
So by now we basically heard 3 terms already that are quite familiar if you dig into press about fintech trends and technology and so on, where AI, of course. You just mentioned machine learning, 2 of you, and big data. Would you guys mind, whoever wants to go first, to try to give your definition of how you see what is AI and maybe how you differentiate it to the other terms just mentioned?
Yeah.
So I think AI is like science fiction. It's right. It's Terminator. It's kind of it's Blade Runner. It's a kind of thinking, feeling machine. Whereas in actual fact, the machine learning is practical applications of advanced computing to try and tease out features or processes. And within machine learning, there are 100 different subsets and tools that you can use to solve particular problems. And the gulf between AI and actual machine learning is very, very broad.
Let me maybe try to give us an anecdote. I mean, what we hear today about AI sounds relatively new and modern, right? But in reality, is the application of the computing power to algorithms that have been around forever. And they've been developed in the 50s, in the 60s. The problem is that we did not know how to create a speed so that the results of this complicated algorithm could be immediately available in near time and real time. So this is a fundamental difference. And that's why I remember where in the 1990, when I was completing my PhD in statistics, I mean, it was pretty depressing, I have to say, because you were creating an algorithm, put it in the machine, and then go home, and the morning after, you were looking at the results. Right? That was 27 years ago. Now, this same algorithm with the computing power allow you to have these immediate capabilities. You were just mentioning the possible detection of anti-money laundering or terrorist attack. That requires immediate action. You cannot wait overnight. So this is a fundamental difference, I would say, that allows us to have these applications that before were unthinkable.
I think that is one of the major points. Another point is that in the old days, like 90s, everything was about causality. When statisticians start to build a model, they deduct why this model might work. Using something like machine learning, you give this up. You just take the whole bunch of information, of data available, and feed it into a model that on its own tries to find out what's important and what's not important. That's what we call learning. And there's different approaches how to do that. Some mimic how the brain does it. Some are more brute force. In the end, all this is just mathematics. So I think the 2 points are the main differentiator why AI now is so hot and wasn't before. The one that Roberto said is that we now have the compute power. We can now analyze data in the petabytes or even bigger areas within a week. In the old days, we just couldn't read it so fast or generate it so fast. And the other is that we gave up causality in the beginning and tried to come up with why is that the outcome of this bunch of data afterwards. You know, in the old days, we had a model that just said, this must be an important factor, this must be an important factor, now do analytics on it. Now we just feed everything in, and the outcome says, let's say you are able to get a mortgage, or you're not able to get a mortgage, and then we can find out why that is the case.
Yeah, from our perspective, we use AI a lot in the, let's say, marketing level, but as soon as we talk to experts, we never use the term AI, but rather stick to machine learning. And machine learning for us has many definitions. So one definition would be supervised versus unsupervised. So supervised is that you have already labeled data, maybe by humans, maybe automatic. And unsupervised learning would be to find structure in an automated way from the data. And another differentiation would be, I think, is it a hybrid approach, or is it just automatic? Is the machine learning doing something completely automatic, or is it something that enhances some human intelligence?
I would basically like to pick up your point about basically stepping away from the term of causality and moving over to correlations. Because I personally think in many aspects of financial services, you have to find, or you have to explain the reason why you basically end up with a decision as well. And this might hinder actually application use cases. Maybe Charlie, you already told us that you're applying technology on a very sensitive matter, basically. Can you tell us, do you encounter a problem like this? And if yes, how do you deal with it?
Yeah, so in terms of the possible negative repercussions and ramifications of machine learning and ways in which it can wreak havoc on society, I guess people like Elon Musk have warned that you have a kind of AI that's out of control and it becomes sentient, and that's on one extreme. But then also you can be subject to the whims and the decisions of a black box. So suddenly you're denied credit, you can't get a mortgage, you can't get a bank account, all because the computer says no. So one of the things people are very against are the possibilities that, for no apparent reason, you get this kind of Kafkaesque society whereby the algorithm denies you access to everything. In particular, it could mean that, say, you're labeled as a terrorist when in fact you're not. So what we try and do is try and always ensure there's some sort of rational explanation, some sort of way in which you can audit the model to say, well, here are the specific tangible reasons why we think this person is very, very high risk. For instance, they're on the FBI most wanted list. This article in a newspaper says that they're a terrorist. So you have to have some sort of specific tangible reason why they're being accused of a certain crime.
Yeah, but to that point, if I can add, it's true what you're saying, but I don't want to give the impression that AI creates financial exclusion. Right? There are examples where, on the contrary, creates financial inclusion. People that do not have access to financial solution before could finally have access because there is an enormous amount of data available that human being by itself could not have a core. Let me give you an example. In China, for example, which I know is far away, I know it's different, but nevertheless, there is only 25% of the people that have the capability to prove their numbers and their data in order to go through the traditional way of being evaluated from the scoring point of view. 75% of the population doesn't. There is a company called N Financial, for example, that develops an algorithm which takes from 250 to 900 points online and offline in order to try to create a score for those people that otherwise would be totally financially excluded, right? You do realize that 900 points online and offline could not be analyzed by a human being on a daily basis in order to understand if this final user or beneficiary could be addressed or not. So there are also components where this can be addressed. You're absolutely right. I mean, we should not rely on AI, not an automatic decision maker, also because there's always a level of confidence in the end, and we are the ones setting the level of confidence. So we decide, I trust that answer from AI if the level of confidence is 90, 95, 99% correct. But if you're below the threshold, you have to decide to go somewhere else and then decide autonomously with human support.
All right. If no one wants to comment, then let's dig a little bit too in, let's say, applicable use cases. After we heard something from you about that already, Jochen, maybe you can give us some more insights on how you apply machine learning on what, and what's the benefit you take out of that. Well, besides having this on your marketing approach, as you put it before.
Yeah. So a lot of discussion today is about so-called deep learning, which is basically neural networks, which is a rather old technology, but with deeper layers. And I think it's sort of a nature-inspired machine learning because we try to mimic some very basic structures of the human brain, excluding all the biochemics and all these other aspects, just neurons and connections, that's it. So you copy a small part, a small fraction of a biological system and put it to the computer at work and get a learning system. We don't use so much deep learning, we rather use another nature-inspired machine intelligence, which is derived from complex systems. That's an approach where you look at like biology, physics, complex systems, for example, is internet traffic, the human brain, platforms, for example, they have emergent properties, very difficult and complex relationships in there. And natural science people tend to analyze these with network analysis. So they look at the links and if there are emergent properties. And we basically copy that idea from inspired by nature, complex systems, to financial problems. For example, a payment network in a bank could be regarded as a complex system, and you can get much deeper insight by using like graph theory, network analysis to look at the linkages between the data. And that's not so new of an idea because look at Google and LinkedIn, their basic engines are focusing on linked data. And in finance, you have financial transactions networks, for example. And so you can apply same methodologies. And another business line that we have is using time series of financial assets, for example, and exclude a network structure from this data to better understand how shocks are propagated in this system and how the complex financial markets actually work. And then you can translate that to like a better diversified portfolio, which is more robust, because the diversification has been formalized in 1950s by Markowitz, and a lot of robo service offerings still use the Markowitz under the hood, and I think this has to change. There's new technology to apply here, so we use nature-inspired machine learning for financial applications, basically.
So you three, you all, I put it like this, you mentioned quite complex, quite tech-heavy use cases already. Michael, what you described is...
I can give you a more simple, maybe.
That's what I'm thinking, because you basically described you're replacing like an advisor. You know what's best for your customer before he does. So.
Well, let me go back like 5 years when I did something like this the first time on large scale. I worked for a managing consulting company that worked for a telco provider. And telco is heavily regulated. It's not only banks regulated. And so there is regulation when to approach a customer and when not to approach a customer. So what we did is we went through all the information to find out which customer wants to cancel the contract in the future. So churn prediction. And after we had that, we analyzed what's the leading factor. So we were able to give them some goodies, some benefits, so they prolonged the contract. So we rebuilt the whole churn into something that nowadays we would call AI. In these days, we just called it neural networks. And it worked extremely efficient. So we came up with over 50% churned people and over 75% of correctly predicted churn people. So we didn't lose many people in this process. Which is actually a very simple business case. And return on invest was 1.6 months, which is quite fast. What we now do is we try to use the information that we receive from the clients and the banks to, for example, predict what is a good point in time that we do withdrawals from their accounts. Because we all know that it is pretty expensive if something goes wrong in this process. So we predict a good point in time.
Can I speak? Yeah, I mean, that particular regression analysis has been around a long time, right? It doesn't require huge amounts of data. I think the reason why everyone's listening to this conference, I think what people want to hear about is stuff that's new and cool and we couldn't do 5 years ago, and there's huge amounts of that, right? So a month ago, there was the new AlphaGo version, right? And there, because they've got all this new techniques, because Google, Amazon are putting billions of dollars into this technology, they've discovered secrets of this game that never existed before. They have the new Babelfish technology, whereby they can, in a single earpiece, translate from language to language. You got billions of dollars going into new technologies which make things which fundamentally weren't possible before possible. I mean, we're spending a ton of money on our Amazon web servers, which are now very efficient, and everything's reached an inflection point whereby we can get hundreds of millions of web pages into a database and then analyze them. And so I think what's really exciting now, and I think the reason why we're now at the top of this hype cycle is because suddenly there are tons of new exciting applications which can be applied to the whole range of different areas of finance. I mean, default prediction, churn prediction, conversion prediction, like, I wouldn't say that's like state-of-the-art, bleeding-edge stuff. I think there's lots of stuff that's super exciting, which probably we should explore in more detail, right?
So, sure.
No, I think, but the message that I would like that comes out of this panel discussion is that Eurofinance Week is that it's not anymore a matter, as you can hear, of should we invest or should the financial industry invest in AI or not. For me, the question should be how soon you want to invest in AI. Because not anymore a matter of discussing is the technology mature, is the technology capable to provide solution. The maturity is there, has been there for a while, but there has been a lot of applications already in the financial industry to prove that this can be immediately made available. It's not an easy task. It doesn't happen overnight, obviously. We at Deutsche, we started looking at it 2 years ago, frankly. I started embracing this technology 2 years ago. We had almost 1 year discussion internally, what to choose, which are the user cases, what are the goals of using the artificial intelligence. Now, this year in 2017, we started implementation, which took less than the decision. Let's be very honest. It probably will take you 1 year, 1.5 years to decide, should you go or no go. But when you decide, the implementation is much faster. And in fact, in November, we'll just release the first application of AI. My suggestion is that let's not expect that AI will replace the entire banking industry as it is. But we need to decide, what are we expecting from it? Are we expecting efficiency? Are we expecting augmented advisory? Or are we expecting also reduction of operational risk, back to your example? Once you decide in which section you want to operate, then within each of these 3 categories, there are plenty of use cases that you can develop. It can be in asset management, it can be relationship management, it can be a mortgage extraction, it can be in a legal proceeding, it can be in compliance features. Each of these applications, as long as you see redundancy, as long as you see huge amount of data, as long as you combine the new concept of big data, which is not only the transactions that we have in our statement of accounts, but also all the other social elements that we're not able to review from as human beings. And as long as you in big data, you include also data, non-data, images as well, and anything else, then you realize that, of course, the artificial intelligence component is very valuable.
Going back to the start of your statement. So if I translate that to how will this affect, let's say, people who might be working in banks? There's many people wearing suits here as well. Would that mean that we'll first, I'll put it harshly, get rid of the monkey work? I know your CEO was recently cited with something like that. And then as soon as we're done with that, we'll move up the value chain.
See, our CEO made a statement which, of course, had a lot of reverberation, that we're always afraid to face the impact of industrial revolution. And this is the 4th industrial revolution, right? So there's nothing new. We can deny it, or we can try to ride the wave. And if we want to ride the wave, of course, any industrial revolution creates the fact that some jobs will disappear, but some new jobs will appear. If we only think about all the evolution in technology, in London by itself, 150,000 new jobs have been created because of the fintech and technology environment. So we can say that some jobs have been destructed, but some jobs have been created at the same time. And I think also in the banks, if the banks decide to use artificial intelligence, absolutely, I deny the fact that we end up reducing the workforce just because we replace solutions. I always think that behind the AI, you need to have what I call the curators, right? Because in order to create algorithm, in order to feed the information, you need to have subject matter experts, which are the ones that have knowledge of the clients, of the financial products, of the financial processes, in order to try to create this. So at that point, the job can change. You don't become anymore a manual executor of those transactions, but become a curator of machines that will help you to have better services for the clients and efficiency within the bank.
I mean, when you were mentioning the AlphaGo challenge before, you already said, well, new secrets have been discovered, so this will enable human players to get better. You're basically putting out a similar point. The curator will always be there and will always be in charge somehow. So where will this drive the whole relationship between the machine and the human being? I mean, like 15 years ago, the machine was pretty stupid. It was there to help us with the very simple things like typing, or I don't know, overdoing it, maybe it's more like 25 years ago. And well, apparently it can do much more, but where will it go and where will the way lead us?
Yes, just to follow Roberto's point, I think the real driver of change in banking isn't going to be AI, it's going to be doing the basics well. So I think in London, like, so the last company I started was a fintech, right? So we're kind of competing with banks. So I think really the issue there is you have hundreds of companies attacking every single product line that Deutsche Bank, HSBC, all these big banks offer, yes, because the big banks are still doing things in batch files. They have no idea what APIs or good technology is, right? So you basically say, right, I'm going to go to town on small business loans. Like I think my friend from Funding Circles here, right? So I'm just going to do that one particular thing really well. And that's the same for every single piece of the bank. And that's 100% what you see. And lots of them are using AI, but AI is just a tool, right? With regards to the second question of kind of augmentation. So there's obviously a kind of spectrum. So the favorite way that I explain that is you have, on the one hand, like people, then you have the Robocop, right? So you have a kind of human brain augmented by a robotic skeleton, right? And then on the extreme, you have Terminator, which is full automation, right? Some jobs, augmentation, like, so looking at cancerous cells, right? So some of them are benign, some of them are malignant, right? And the Robocop method of augmenting people with AI means that you get much better accuracy, and therefore you can save lives, right? So across the whole diversity and different ranges of finance, you'll see specific solutions which actually help. I don't think like senior level charismatic executives are at risk, but people perhaps who are in India or in Poland who are doing more menial jobs probably are.
I think this interactive element is very important, especially in the financial industry, because we will have to justify what this machine has learned. As in the telco industry, it's highly regulated. And if you look at this statement by the Financial Stability Board, they have analyzed the impact of AI on financial markets. And of course, it should get more efficient, which is, from their point of view, it's a good thing. But they are also warning about the black box character that some applications have, that you can explain why the machine is so successful and what's actually learned inside. So you need this interactive, like a visualization element or something that the domain expert can analyze to get in touch with the machine, what it has learned. Coming to this Go game example, I think this grandmaster who got beaten by the machine, he analyzed the moves afterwards, and in the beginning he thought it's completely nonsense what this machine is suggesting, and he was already looking forward to win this game, but then he lost. So, and then he found like new strategies and way of opening this game that augmented his way of playing. So I think it should be like a collaborative learning somehow between machine and the human. At the same time, you can explain to the regulator what you're actually doing.
Well, this is pretty bad example. May I drop in here? Because Sedol, who is the Korean guy who lost against AlphaGo, he said the machine did moves that no human ever before did. No human that he was aware of. So he learned a lot from the machine, but he was not able to explain why this move was done.
Yeah,
so coming out of this, and by the way, AlphaGo is already obsolete. They came up with AlphaGo 0, which beat the other thing in 3 days, because they brought in motivation. So the new system now wants to win. Mm-hmm. And it gives points if it is even a bad win. You know, it calculates now its chances to win on a completely different way, on a motivational way.
Yeah.
So what I think will be the challenge in the future, and you called them the curators or something, is we have to have people that are able to explain why did we come to this decision. And that currently, with the current toolboxes, is pretty difficult. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying it's impossible, and I'm not saying that in 2 years' time we think it was a problem that never existed. But currently it's not that simple. If the data is huge, and I personally worked on databases that grew by a petabyte per month, which is really huge, then nobody is able to analyze the information any longer.
Mm-hmm. I think the problem...
So that's a challenge, I guess, and that brings me back full circle to what Roberto said, is I don't think the workforce will shrink. I think that the foci will move.
You need to monitor constantly, obviously. Whatever you develop today, you need to constantly monitor the consistency of the output, right? Because otherwise, you gave the challenge that somebody could come up with an algorithm that is doomed to win. Yes. That could be dangerous. I totally agree with that. But it's different. Let's not go now to extreme. Let's stay in the financial industry. I mean, it's one thing if you use an algorithm which is using as high-speed trading, and then you don't know what it's doing, and that's a black box. But it's different if you just create a solution for an advisor, being a corporate banker, being a private wealth manager, that today needs to understand the perfect match between the universe of the securities out there with the profile of the client, with the MiFID regulation, with all the compliance activities. And then theoretically, we expect this private wealth management to have a complete knowledge of thousands and thousands of funds, hedge funds, securities, stocks, real estate, potential investments, in order to try to find the best match to the best profile of investment that person. Well, sorry, that's not going to happen, right? Because today, we are able, for example, to feed instantly on a daily basis 25,000 information per day, which constantly readjusts the possible portfolio of that individual. It doesn't mean that the automatic decision will be taken, but then we empower, we augment the capability of the advisor to make decision ultimately, having a range of information that he or she will not be able otherwise to do it by itself. So I tend to distinguish between the black box consent and the augmented support that some of these tools can provide. And then you can choose, you can go one or the other, but I would like to avoid that we think that automatically AI is full replacement, it can be augmented.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the problem with this methodology that was chosen in this Go game. It was deep learning, and that's neural networks, and we had this discussion before. You can look into the results of what this neural network actually has learned, but you cannot really justify it. You cannot
Exactly.
You have no human access to it. And that's why, I mean, we should focus on a different kind of AI, which is maybe more like visual, like topological data analysis, looking at the shape of data or networks, because those you can display and visualize and interact, and gives you more access to the complexity of the system, and maybe gives you a reason why this machine is doing something. It's not deep learning. I think that's black box. Yeah.
I mean, if it wins, who cares, right? I mean, like, if it's better, and it's like, I mean, talk about hedge funds, like, the reason why Trump won the election in the US, because he had the backing of Renaissance Technologies and Robert Mercer, who pioneered the whole AI in hedge funds, right? If your algorithm saves lives by predicting cancer, then who cares if you can explain it or not, right? It's if it's making more money, or if it's saving lives, or if it's winning, then, I mean, I don't think you're entirely correct around the whole AlphaGo thing, right? So the first version looked at the previous human games, so it was supervised learning. So it was taught, the machine learning was taught by previous human games, but the second version was untaught, so it was unsupervised, and it simply had an adversarial computer against computer, thousands of games, and by not being polluted by previous human thinking, it was able to beat the human version 100 to 1. And then the new version could then teach humans far more than they knew about their own game. Maybe in 200 years, we'd have been at the level of AlphaGo 2, right? But fundamentally, we've learned more from the computer in version 2 than we've learned from hundreds of years of experts, right? So this whole notion of it has to be explicable, we have to be like, focus on stuff we can understand. Well, if it's better, then why?
Let me try to be a little bit provocative here. Because I think we heard a lot of, let's say, very impressive technology and impressive advances in technology. But if I put on the glasses of, let's say, a retail person in banking out there and try to be impressed by AI, what do I see these days? Like, I go into a chatbot of a very modern bank, and I realize after 5 questions, I will not get further anymore. Or, for example, in a field that I've been digging a lot, I was quite impressed by some white papers or theories around totally or only algorithm-managed funds, actually, than even picking stocks and analyzing huge amounts of data and so on. And I listened to a very smart guy, I still believe he's super smart, explaining his theories, and then they hit the market and they totally failed. I've seen that example twice in like half a year now. So where's the gap between the theory and the big advantages and many, many examples that we are currently seeing out there?
I think it's the classical gap between research and what Google does and Facebook does. Still, I count it research. And broad pickup. It just takes a couple of months, a couple of years. It already accelerated heavily. In the old days, it was like 10 years. and the capsule networks that the new version of Google Alpha 0 is using, they got invented 10 years ago. And it took them 10 years to introduce them into the public from a white paper. So white papers are good. And Andrew Ng, who is one of the gurus of AI, he recently said we should stop writing white papers. We should implement.
But okay, let me put it more directly.
It just takes time.
When will the investment advisor out there or the portfolio manager will have his go moment or Google Go, Alpha Go moment?
I mean, if I can be blunt, I mean, from my point of view, it's not a matter, as I said before, of if that can happen, but when. I mean, there are lots of decisions there. Again, it's not that technology doesn't allow that to have that moment, the go moment. That, of course, behind that, you need to decide if you want to change a business model, a business process, if you think that your clients are also prone to have this kind of approach. So a lot of decisions, of course, carefully need to be taken. It's not just a replacement of one business model and another, and all of a sudden, it will be totally accepted. But again, it's important to underline the fact that you can use, as of today, let me give you an example. The one case that we announced also recently that we're going to launch at the end of November, if you want, is limited in its own capability, but it's a way to prove that these things can be handled. We just do use artificial intelligence for internal support line, right? Which means, as of today, like any bank, any kind of company, you have inevitably your sales force that asks questions to the central functions for something they're not able to immediately provide, either to the clients, can be a contract, a feature, a process, a policy. So the hundreds of thousands of questions coming from the network, your sales force, which can be via email, chat, voice, phone calls, you name it, right? So 100,000 questions coming in, elaborated by somebody, and then the answer goes back. So you have this kind of flow back and forth, back and forth. But you do realize, obviously, that 70% of these kind of questions, they're pretty repetitive, right? Because pretty much you will be able to analyze those. And then we realized that with the usage of artificial intelligence embedded with natural language process, based on your point, so we decided to go that route because we wanted to have the capability to engage in a natural language dialogue which recognizes semantic, sentiment analysis, so it's not a typical chatbot. Again, also, let's please not confuse chatbot with artificial intelligence, completely two different things. Right? The chatbot just is a series of scripts that predict that more or less you will ask me this question and more or less I will give you that answer. NLP and AI is a completely different story. It's cognitive, it's capability understanding. If I'm a client and I'm saying, I try to reach the relationship manager, is one thing. But if I write, I have tried 5 times to reach the relationship manager, then AI needs to recognize, I've tried 5 times, it means I'm frustrated, I'm upset, that person is not answering, find a solution now. Don't send me to somebody else. So this is the capability of natural language process recognition. In order to do that, you need to work properly in order to create a seamless experience that is closer to the one that we can have between human beings.
And these things are ready for the market. So just last weekend was Singles Day in China, and it's the single biggest day of retail. And Alibaba did all the call center stuff with AI, everything. Yeah. And they sold like 42 billion in a single day.
So the question for me was, when will financial markets have their AlphaGo moment, right? For me, that's a question about like trading hedge funds, right? Basically, yeah. For me, there are kind of 3 things, right? So there's Quantopian, which is a kind of Andreessen Horowitz-backed hedge fund platform on the West Coast. There's the Marshall Wace Tops Fund, and then there's the Soros notion reflexivity. So Marshall Wace Tops was the first hedge fund platform whereby brokers would contribute their own recommendations for stock tips, and then they'd see which brokers were correct, and then trade upon those, and they made like a fortune. The Andreessen Horowitz Quantopian Fund is the same thing, whereby people submit their own algorithmic, machine learning-driven processes for trading the stock market. And then the most successful hedge fund investor historically has been George Soros. And his key philosophical point is that with reflexivity, ideas have ramifications. Therefore, unlike in the sciences, the ideas themselves will come to shape the markets themselves. And what you've seen is with Quantopian, that hasn't really worked. So they've tried to apply a kind of system whereby people can contribute their own ideas and funds and try to see whether or not machine learning can accurately solve and beat the markets. And so far, they've failed. So, but I think with Renaissance Technologies, given that they're probably the second most successful hedge fund in the world, there are ideas out there, but we just haven't seen them or understood how they can be applied ourselves.
All right, we have like 8 minutes here. I can ask a couple of more questions, but we have quite a big audience, and we obviously have some very skilled guys to answer questions here. So are there any questions from the audience? Yes, yes, I will.
Thank you. I have a question about AI and taxes. As I know, and Bill Gates mentioned once, what it could be possible in the future to make a special tax for AI, because it's if you use an AI, you use less workforce. Could you imagine some ways how could it work in Europe?
Gets halfway philosophical. Who wants to start?
Well, currently we tax the generation of value, so I could agree with you. But if this is sustainable, I'm not an economist.
I mean, there have been huge debates around whether you have a basic income for the whole population, and there's a huge amount of literature detailing that. It's a political rather than social issue. I don't think at any given point in the immediate future people are going to have mass unemployment. I mean, 5 years ago, you didn't have professional people tweeting or doing social media. Every day, a whole new class of jobs and categories of work is opening up. This whole Marxist dream of having the ability to have full employment, or in fact machines industrializing so you have no need for employment, is, it's been around for 200 years, and it doesn't look as though it's going to be necessary anytime soon.
Yeah, it's a question for Charles, actually, and thank you for your very candid views. Love them. I wonder if you've taken your commands about who cares about why things happen as long as they get better to the regulator. Wonder what they would think about that. Another candid view from you maybe on this.
Yeah, I guess I don't necessarily believe everything I say, but at least it's interesting. Yeah, I'd much rather have a more interesting conversation than a boring conversation. Yeah, you're completely right. Yeah, if someone's excluded or maligned, or yeah, like actions have consequences, and potentially at this scale they have huge consequences. So yeah, that point is entirely valid and correct.
Hi, my name is Jacob Mose. Taking the vantage point of a risk manager, how would I look at the model risk of introducing AI? If I, for example, ask myself the question, how biased is the data I base my deep learning on? How do I handle that risk?
Well, we have a joke in machine learning which says 80% of our time is data cleansing and 20% of our time is complaining about it. You are correct. Data quality is key. And when you write an algorithm, you're not free of bias. So it always helps to have a team programming approach or something like this when you build your models.
Yeah, but that's why I mentioned before, you need to have what I call them before curator. You can call them the way you want, but obviously in your case as a risk manager, of course, if you decide to embrace that solution, you need to have people risk management expertise behind, checking, evaluating, adding component, testing, and then benchmarking what you have with what you would have otherwise if you add additional components, which are the unknown unknowns, for example, because that is the difference. If you're able in your typical risk model algorithm to add unknown components, and that gives you the capability to predict better the enforceability of that action or also the underwriting and the risk, then obviously you will decide if you have a better situation than the one you have today, right?
Yeah,
and I think just one of the main issues that we had in the financial industries, if you think in Europe, but also in the States, imagine if you could have had artificial intelligence into 2007 crash market in the real estate, in the European disaster that we had in Italy, in Spain, in Greece. If you had some components there that could clearly give you messages, you're going to hit the wall, maybe we could have avoided the wall, right? But somehow in those algorithms, those risk management algorithms that were created, either they things they were neglected, or somehow they were not foreseen properly because they were clear evidence of data coming from the market, not from your counterpart that you were lending to, but from the market, from a lot of activities, from a lot of buzz that was clearly indicating that something was going to happen, right? But those traditional algorithms, which were based on the known, did not predict that. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the question in terms of how do you actually apply AI, it takes absolutely ages. It's really expensive, lots of dead ends. You need like 4 people feeding you data for every actual person doing machine learning. You can try out 10 different techniques, of which 9 different work. Yeah, so I mean, to actually build a business or apply it to a business is extremely difficult and expensive, and I wish you the best of luck.
But I think the question was focusing on the model risk. And especially you, Charlie, you mentioned, I know you said you don't believe in everything you say, but I don't have to care about how it works if it gets better. Isn't that exactly like the uncontrollable model risk that he was just mentioning?
Yeah, I'm an example of the things that we're trying to avoid.
Perfect. I think we have time for one more question.
Exactly, over here.
Hi, does anyone of you have an idea what the end game is going to look like? I mean, is this a market that you can simply figure out, and in the end there will be no more trading because it's all useless, or will there be forever competition? Humans will no longer have any idea what's going on, but some will get wealthy and others will declare bankruptcy, and we just don't know why. What's the end game?
Yeah, sorry. The end game obviously is like the singularity, right? You've heard of this thing, the chief futurist of Google is called Ray Kurzweil, and he has a university, which I attended like 2 years ago, called Singularity University on the NASA campus in Silicon Valley. And you get this kind of step change in technology whereby AI takes over and the world like kind of ends.
With a short answer, it's a T6000. It's a T6000.
Okay, I think the Terminators are always good to end a discussion here. Yeah. Well, guys, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you very much for participating and for listening. And, well, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.